last one we talked about the causes of World War I. Now it has started, and now we have a brouhaha taking place here in Europe. To review those, militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, those are your long-term causes, and of course, the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand is going to be the one.
WrestleMania, brother!
It's going to be the one that gets it all going.
That's the one I thought I had.
Ah, you want one too? Okay.
Assassination, okay.
So we got Sophie, the Archduke Ferdinand. Nice painting. And you have him right there with his pistol.
Wrong turn.
Wrong turn. So there they are. You know, it's kind of funny. Some resources that I've looked at in books that I've read on this, it didn't happen that quickly. It took a while. Like even like the headlines when it came to primary sources. When it came to even in, for example, France, in the French newspapers, I want to say it's a Michael Nyberg book. In the French newspapers, there was some sort of controversy or corruption going on in government that was getting more of the headlines than this right away. So it wasn't like the powder keg sometimes as they describe it.
Right.
But you know, again, we wind up seeing some of these headlines. It's a great photo. It's not saying it's good to see two dead people, but good
creepy,
photo.
right? Yeah.
It is very creepy.
We had the photo of Abraham Lincoln laying in state.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, when we talk about why it's so big, it's all of these alliances, those secret alliances that Mr. Kogan was talking about, and how.
And when you get at it, you know, and we think back to imperialism, we have a leading industrial power.
Yep.
A leading industrial power. A leading industrial power. A leading industrial power. We have the strongest countries in the world are about to duke it out. Who's missing?
The United
States. For now.
For now. Yeah, but wait, there's more. You know? So we're going to remain out of this, but while they're fighting on, what we'll look at today is just some of the technology and how warfare has changed. Because I'm probably sure you remember from the American Revolution and the Civil War, you know, the rifles itself, or muskets, I should say, you would shoot, you'd reload it right on the battlefield, and then you'd shoot again.
Linear warfare.
Linear.
You'd
exactly.
line up, I guess about 30 yards away. They weren't that far away.
And they weren't that accurate.
And you're sending literally volleys back and forth, almost like it's tennis, until the order to charge was given, and then somebody would have to, you know, evacuate the field.
Exactly.
And then that's the victor in the battle.
So even to this day, a lot of European battlefields from World War I still look that way. You're still going to see these huge craters left over. There's still a lot of explosives that remain from that. But this is going to take place throughout Europe, a lot of places in France as well, when we look at the damage that's going to do. The trenches. This is going to be something new. When it comes to the trenches, they kind of were doing this towards the end of towards the end of the Civil War. However, not as elaborate, and when they were doing it, the war had ended. But, you know, again, with trenches, it's exactly what you think it is.
Yep.
It's a hole in the ground.
So think of it this way.
Yeah.
You know, for centuries, really, we've been fighting using linear tactics.
Yep.
Which somebody was finally like, why am I standing 30 yards, 40 yards away from somebody?
Exposing all of this.
Exactly. Let's just dig into the ground so the only thing they could see is my head.
Make myself a smaller target.
It really makes sense.
It did.
It did.
But however, you know, with each kind of technological advancement or even changes in warfare, there are going to be some unanticipated consequences, I guess you could say, or things you didn't know that could possibly happen. But when you look at how extensive these trenches were, they were rather extensive. And of course,
miles upon miles.
And of course, the
miles.
goal, when you're looking here, especially this one, he's making himself a much, much smaller target. So he's able to fire up here, only over here is exposed, he's up there, but a jam. This guy's chilling out, waiting for his turn, and he's standing lookout.
I love the shape of the trenches, the zigzag pattern.
Yes.
You know, and I asked the kids, why do you think it's a zigzag pattern? And they're like, they don't get it. You know, it was actually a matter of protection.
Yeah.
That if an enemy shell
lands
in here
and goes out,
it minimizes the damage of the people in the trench.
Pain in the neck with that is that when it did go out, you know, you had to now redraw your hand maps for guys who were navigating that. That was particularly troublesome for people who were going to go and provide aid and medically evacuate these people as well.
With this photograph, one of the first questions I asked is, you know, what about this photograph is going to make life miserable in the trench?
Do they catch this? They do.
They do. They're like, well, it's really, really muddy. I'm like, good, you got that.
Yeah.
It's really, really muddy. Now, where am I going to have to sleep? You know, oh, maybe down there in the mud. Maybe if I'm lucky up here on the, I forget what this is, the parapet.
This step,
You know,
fire step.
Fire step. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, the conditions in these trenches, none of our little, you know, none of our kids can understand this. My children who are like so pampered, it's like, I'm cold.
Right. I mean,
cold.
this is where you were going to pretty much eat. This was where, I mean, the steps as well, because a lot of the fighting was taking place at night. You were going to sleep on that fire step, pretty much. I was over in Europe a couple of years ago, and, you know, just for fun, you know, I was the only weirdo who was walking around. I'm like, okay, I have to lay down on this just to see what this is like. And you're talking...
I'm not the only one.
Oh, yeah, you're talking, it's about this wide, and that's where you're sleeping. And you'd probably be... At certain points in the fetal positions, I usually like to sleep on my back, have the hands out with my comfy pillow. You're not going to get that.
We went to Valley Forge a bunch of years ago.
Oh, you have to.
I walked around barefoot. I had to.
I mean, how can you not be there and not try out the fire step?
Yeah.
I mean,
you get into this. I mean, this was,
Yeah.
I mean, listen, these guys are covered in mud. You know, we've got a guy sleeping down here,
One over
guy
here.
sleeping over here, you know, as somebody else is on lookout, you know, wondering is somebody going to come across no man's land. Sleeping. You know, these guys, what do you think they're looking out for? Sniper fire.
Up, sniper.
You know, hoping a sniper fires at him, giving up their position so our sniper can shoot at them. Really, I don't want to say a boring war, but it was a boring war. In that most of your time was spent in downtime.
I think some sources I've read, you know, depending on the war itself, you know, there's a great deal of boredom with about 10 to 15, anywhere between 10 to 20%. Of course, you can't put a hard number on that. There's a lot of boredom, but then there's a lot of that, you know, when it's not boring, it's exciting.
Yeah.
But then there's the whole time, though, is that when something is not going on, there's the living in fear. I have to duck over here. You know,
am I too tall?
Yeah, exactly.
Walking through
There's
these
just
trenches.
so many of that living in fear that just really, it gets to you after a while.
You know, and part of life in the trench was, you know, at night, the whistle would go over the top, and you'd run out into no man's land. You know, out into this area that was just like barbed wire and landmines and hopefully overtake your enemy trench. And you never, very rarely did. It was just, you know, day after day after day of maybe 3 inches of advancement of your trench.
I think we should probably come back to that map then, because this fighting went back and forth.
And here's this no man's land.
And right in the middle was that no man's land, and you really didn't gain much. It was, you know, artillery fire where they're firing these huge bombs, these huge explosives, and it would go back and forth, and you'd go over the top and charge. You know, what you were gaining was not a significant amount enough, considering.
And I mean, we got to bring up 1917, the movie.
At the opening scene for that gives a great.
Yeah, when they go out in that huge crater.
Yeah.
That's like, oh my God, that's like an artillery shell crater. Gives you an idea.
I have some good ones of over in France where they have these huge craters, and there's still signs going, you can't go over here because we know there's explosives there, but we just don't know 100 years later.
I love this photograph.
Oh,
because this ties into our artifact lesson that unfortunately we can't do.
Yeah, but when we're looking at hygiene,
yeah,
this definitely tells you the hygiene.
You know, and these guys are sewing their shirts. You know, from little rips or little
sewing. Also, they're looking for those little what do we call them here from this one? Why am I drawing cooties?
Bed bugs, cooties, lice.
Yeah, they're also looking for that as well.
That. You know, when you get into like, why would like a hole in your shirt or a hole in your pants be a big deal?
You didn't have so many outfits either.
Not only that, but like you get some dirt or mud in there.
Oh, sure.
And that's rubbing against your boots or your socks that you're wearing.
I mean, you're uncomfortable.
And then the infection that sets in. Because don't forget, I mean, these men are living here in the trenches.
Yep.
You know, where do you think they're relieving themselves?
Exactly. This way you live.
It's disgusting.
It pretty is. It's horrible because even if you have a proper place for a latrine or bathroom, whatever the case may be, you are talking about men in their late teens, early 20s, who can be lazy, who are probably not raised right, who probably don't want to pay attention to that particular rule, who may go somewhere else.
Or it's you're really tired and you don't want to.
And when you talk about the tight-knit quarters that we're living in here, and the fact that you have these guys looking for cooties, which are going to be your lice. you know, if one of these guys gets sick, it's going to spread. One guy gets lice, it's going to spread. And it's a huge, huge problem. They tried to burn these lice and get into boiling water, you know, the hot water. I mean, it was just miserable.
I mean, it's just great. And then what's great about World War I is there are so many photographs of it. Oh. You know, we have some of the Civil War.
Yes.
But I mean, there's actual live video footage as well.
Oh, absolutely.
That will show. You know, but this was your life during the day.
This was it.
Compared to nighttime when you're going to be fighting. You know, this is an interesting one because this dude's dead.
Yeah, and there's half his body. And you know, and like today, forget it. This would be somebody you'd have to
go back.
remove from the battlefield, away from his buddies right away, because you don't want that to induce shock on there, crush their morale about how they feel about fighting. I don't know the story behind that picture, but if he was one of theirs, you would probably want to move that right out of the way. Trench foot. Oh my gosh. When we look here, when we start to explore that, I think the best way to talk about this with students is that if you've ever been in the tub or in the pool long enough,
you get the prunies.
You get prunies.
Get the prunies.
That can be bad.
Oh, disgusting.
If the weather is cold.
Keep your feet clean. Keep your feet dry. You know, because this is what your feet look like. You know, when they're wet or moist.
Absolutely.
For too long. But trench foot, you know, this is the beginnings of it, gets downright disgusting.
The thing with it as well is that when you look at these soldiers who are living in the trenches, then and now, probably one of the most important parts of your body that you don't want to have injured or uncomfortable is, believe it or not, your feet. Things they tell you to do now, and of course even now with even certain conditions, it's not always ideal. Dry socks, foot powder. You want to make sure that your feet are not, you know, moist or sweating to that effect, because when you have your feet that have been exposed to, I guess you could say dampness, moisture, or whatever the case may be, it's going to cause irritation in your feet. Now, these guys standing in, I'll get back to that. Now, these guys standing in these trenches, walking around.
That was a good one.
Yeah, that's a better one. Walking around, because they're in like
knee deep,
you know, walking around in boots and socks that are been wet. Now all of a sudden it gets really cold, and really what you have here is you have a different version of frostbite, because that's essentially what you have here. They freeze to the point where, unfortunately, your fingers or your toes in this instance
are dead.
They're dead. They become like icicles. You can just go like that and they'll flick right off. I mean, that's how dangerous it winds up becoming. The one thing that you can't get from this picture, but now you're gonna have to imagine, because I'm putting this into your head, is the smell. I had to deal with one person with trench foot, and you know, and it can happen in the desert. In this instance, it did happen in the desert. The smell is just as horrible as what you see.
I can only imagine. That's their bone.
Yeah.
That's their bone.
He's lost all his toes.
And he's alive.
And he's alive.
And he's alive.
You get to go home. However, you know, you're looking at gangrene. This guy probably had a foot amputated.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Do we want to? Yeah, we could just end this with the trench warfare. When you're looking at spending day after day shelling the enemy. Attack would begin after the heavy artillery fire. When it kind of died down, whistles blow, they'd go over the top, charge.
Now, like a little spoiler alert for our next lesson, that this is the first war fought after the Industrial Revolution.
Yes.
So
that plays in huge.
You know, kind of as our next lesson, we'll talk about the weapons of this particular war.
Absolutely. The conditions, I'm sure you're walking away going, all right, this is filthy, this is sick, this is... you know, being in those conditions, even if you're not fighting, living in there day after day after day, it wears on you. They did have a rotation system where you did have guys spending a couple of days at the front. One particular source I read, and I haven't followed up on this, you had one group, I'm trying to remember the country, I have a dog-eared at home that spent, I want to say 65 days consistently at the front in these conditions, at the front line.
Disgusting.
I have to find out more about that.
I couldn't spend 65 minutes.
Right, but you know, when you're looking at the rotation, I mean, just you know, spending day after day like that. Even this is why they needed to rotate them. It was going to impact, you know, their morale if they were at the front just way too long. they have to take a break and get a
Britain
good night's
realized
sleep.
that the most
Oh,
about
yeah.
needing high morale among their soldiers.
Absolutely.
And we'll get into this, how well they were fed.
If you don't, if you don't feel well, if you don't feel good about what you're doing,
Bacon.
yeah.
All right. We're good.
Thanks for watching.